It's new, it's available right now, and it's something very different to what we're normally used to, and it's from WING42. It's the granddaddy of passenger airliners. It's the Boeing 247D airliner that first took to the skies in 1933. And I say it's different because it's not using the traditional flight model. This custom coding also covers the electrics, lubrication system, heat exchange, temperatures, prop feather, malfunctions, a bespoke ground crew, as well as other 3D assets. And they're not done yet. Further work is progressing, so further updates in the short term can be expected. The attention to detail and authenticity, well, it's commendable. And the 247 Delta, well, it's a handful. If you're looking for something to quickly jump in and fly, this may not be for you. The downloaded zip file comes with its own installer which takes care of everything for you, and documentation can be found in the Airliner folder. And interestingly, it comes with a PDF and little nav map location for the radio stations. This was long before VOR, and GPS was the subject of science fiction novels. No autopilot. IFR navigation consisted of tuning into a radio station, and this is faithfully reproduced. Hello everybody, welcome to the SimHanger. My name's Mark. Thanks for watching and let's get started. This aircraft has been faithfully reproduced from one of the very few still in existence, from the Boeing Museum in Seattle. This fully functional cockpit has the right look and feel. It's exactly what you'd expect for one that's been around the block a few times. Overhead is the radio panel. This aircraft sports two Pratt & Whitney noisy 550 horsepower engines and Hamilton props with cutting-edge controllable pitch. The main interface for setting up your aircraft ready for flight was using the tablet or EFB of its day. Yes, it's the clipboard. And here you'll find most of the information you're looking for. There's performance parameters, your passenger, cargo and fuel loading sheet. And here's tip number 1. For this aircraft, do not use the Microsoft Flight Simulator loading parameters. It must be done here or you're going to struggle to start these engines. An engine startup page which you're likely to spend far too much time on. We'll look at this again just now. There's a maintenance page and also simulator settings that determine the realism for engine start, plus faults and failures. And trust me, if you don't do it right, well, you will experience failures. And I speak from personal experience. Option to manage your oil and change it to suit your environment, and a page explaining how the radio beacons work. There's more details in the documentation. In essence, if you're heading towards the radio beacon, you'll get a continuous sound. If you're off course, well, the radio will give you a Morse code, an A or an N, indicating which direction you need to turn to get back on course. Beacon information is in a PDF and also in a little navmap database as mentioned earlier. Okay, back to the main loading sheet. Please excuse the mouse being offset. That was not the case in Sim, and the result of recording in 2K on a 4K monitor. There's a large left tank and two right-hand tanks, and you can change the fuel level by clicking the plus or minus. Tip number 2, if you're struggling to start the engine, make sure it's got fuel in the tanks. I've now added some cargo front and rear, and now I'm adding passengers. I think we'll go for 4 today. Capacity was 10 passengers. In the hatch square I can tell the ground crew what equipment I require. Then my 3 invisible helpers will spring into action. There we are, Hendrik and Howard are making themselves busy, and we're just waiting for hard-working Jack. There he is. He's the man that's going to look after our engines for startup. I now click Make It So and they'll start boarding the passengers once they've got the stairs in place. Whilst our ground crew's not visible, their actions are. Mail has just been finished loading into the nose cone. Passenger suitcases, pending loading, stairs in place and cargo doors open, ready for boarding. Whoops, somebody's left the toilet door open. We can also access the passenger compartment through the cockpit. And you're looking at the height of luxury for 1930s travel. Various things are interactive in the passenger area, again highlighting the amount of attention of detail the developers have paid to this aircraft. No idea what that's for, maybe to hang your coat on. Anyway, let's get this thing started. Our route today is just a short hop from Arlington Municipal to Orca Island. Again, apologies for the mouse being offset, but the items I'm interacting with will highlight. First step, let's check that the parking brake is on, which it is. Now to check we've got fuel in our main tanks. To do that, we grab this knob and let it go. Do the same with the right hand one. The knobs slowly return to the in position and it indicates for a brief period what your fuel level is. I just love that. Next, let's turn on the main fuel valve. That's now on. Now to select the engine we're going to start first, I'm going to choose the left engine and we can now access the primer. Now to move my engine selector to both. Oh, that's a bit far. There we are. And now to select the fuel tank, I'm going to choose left as it's the largest tank. Both mixture and propeller levers now to be pushed fully forward. And then I'm going to crank both throttles. The manual says 10%. Tip number 3, make it 30 or 40%. It's easier for start. That's done and now we can prime. And here's tip number 4. When priming, make sure you pull the handle all the way out and push it back in slowly. It says 3 to 5. Under normal conditions, I find 5 to 6 seems to work best. We're nearly there. Time to put our magnetos on. Both our left and our right magnetos are now dialed through to both. And once that's done, push the pin down so electrical contact is made. We're now going to need the clipboard so that we can give instructions for the engine start to Jack. Our fuel pressure gauges are top right. Now time to work the wobble pump until the pressure reads at least 5 psi. Then click the wind up flywheel, and if we look out we can see Jack's turning the flywheel. No electric start on this baby. And whilst he's doing so, we keep pumping. We need PSI between 3 and 5. Once the tone sounds right, hit mesh flywheel and we should get an engine start, which amazingly we have. Looks like we got a good start on our left engine, and first thing to check is the RPM. If you move the throttles to idle, the engine will die. Make small adjustments to your throttle till it's, I find, something around 1200 RPM, just about right. Don't let the RPM get down towards 1000 because the risk of an engine cutout is increased considerably. We can leave the left engine ticking away, and now time to get the right engine started. Just get the clipboard out of the way, turning the engine selector all the way across to right engine. Oh, by the way, some of the switches are flick switches. Enable you to flip between left and right motor. Back to the wobble pump and let's get the pressure up to around about 5 pounds. And now to prime the engine, remember, pull it all the way out and push it in slowly. A lot of people are struggling to start these engines, and I think it's the priming that's the main cause. There we are, that should do for now. Make sure the primer's pushed all the way in. Time for Jack to get the sweat off his brow. Wind up the flywheel please, Jack. There he goes. We're still working the wobble pump, keeping the pressure up. Certainly keeps you busy during startup. Mesh flywheel has turned green, so we can now press it. Jack pulls the clutch out and we have an engine start. Both engines started first time. I've flown this quite a bit over the last 2 or 3 days, and I've rarely had the pleasure of 2 engine starts on the first attempt. Back to the RPM and adjusting and looking for around 1200 as we did for the left engine. Time now to get our master switch on. We just push the button down. We now have electrical supply. Most of these gauges of course are vacuum, and time to put our nav lights on. And although we don't need it, we're going to turn on some of the cockpit lights. I did say these engines are noisy. Let's just close the window and make it, that's a bit better. If you have both windows open, well, you can hardly hear yourself think. Listen to this. The sounds are really excellent on this aircraft, and no doubt in my mind they're pretty authentic. We're nearly ready for taxi, so let's just do a quick check before we start. Back to our clipboard. We can just flick through and see if there's anything that still needs to be removed or anything that we've forgotten. Maintenance is all okay. Our oil is full. That's all looking good. Our chocks are still in place, so we better get Jack to remove those. There you are, good man Jack. And I think we're ready at last for taxi. Turn on the no smoking and seatbelt signs. Release the handbrake and we're rolling. She's slow to turn, so it's full rudder as well as differential braking. If you don't use both, you'll struggle to make those tighter turns. As we taxi, dabbing the brakes just to maintain an acceptable speed. She does tend to overrun, and to be honest, I'm just a little bit too scared to pull the throttles further back, otherwise the engines may fail. And the thought of starting these again, well, I'm unlikely to be as lucky as I was last time. We're just going to taxi up here below the line, hold short and do our final checks, and then we'll be away. We're holding short, just putting some lights on. Also going to put on the pitot heat. It's reasonably warm, but it's rather safe than sorry. And I'm also going to put on some of the cabin lights. That's done, and the final check, let's put on our landing lights as we're ready to enter the runway. Quick final check on our oil temperatures and oil pressure. Oil pressure is rising quite quickly, need to keep an eye on that. Okay, we're lined up. This aircraft does have a wheel lock. What I think is a wheel lock, it may be a gust lock. I'm going to put it down just to be safe, but I'm not exactly sure what it does. If you know, let me know in the comments below. Now advancing the throttles, I want to get it up to 36 on the manifold pressure. That's right between the white and the red line. Pulling back on the yoke while I do it so it doesn't nose over. Takeoff power is set and release the wheel brakes. Got a slight crosswind, so I'm likely to need quite a bit of rudder. Speed is 50 miles an hour and nose starting to come down. Easing forward on the yoke. Hold her level and she should take herself off, and there she goes. Didn't really need much runway, but with these wings, very much like the Junkers, it doesn't need much. And now, gear up. The sounds are absolutely incredible. We're now starting our climb out. I don't want to be too high today. 3,000, between 3,000 and 3,500 will be plenty for this trip. Airspeed coming up on 100 miles an hour. And I'm climbing at over 1,000 feet per minute. Probably got my nose a little bit too much in the air. I'll start to trim down. I've overturned, I can see from the VFR map. Now to correct my heading. I've pulled back on my prop levers. Recommended takeoff is 2,200, but not for more than 5 minutes. But as soon as we were off the ground, I pulled them back to 2,100 and now back to about 2,000, just to be safe. I don't want to over rev the engines. I got to keep them relatively cool because fire is simulated and a very real problem. I know because I had it on my previous flight. My oil shutters at the moment are fully open. There we go, more or less correcting back on course now. Quick check on our gauges. RPM is just a tad over 2,000. That's okay. Prop lever's okay. Oil temperature is looking good at about 55. Fuel flow is looking good at just over 5, which is where I'd expect it to be during the climb out. But I will keep an eye on that oil pressure. Not sure why it's rising so quickly, almost at maximum. Just starting to scrape along the base of the cloud layer here, and now starting to settle into cruise. This airliner, of course, is quite capable of flying considerably higher, over 20,000 feet, although I imagine the climb will be a fairly long one. Before taking off, it would have been normal to do a run-up, and those run-up checks would have included feathering the props, which are activated by buttons on the far right-hand side of the cockpit. I've skipped it on this occasion. I think there's a bug still, as I was unable to get the props out of feather once I'd put them in feather. We're just over 3,000 feet, which is fine. Oil pressure continues to rise, now almost at 120. Not sure if that's correct or not. As I've climbed, the RPM has decreased and I have nudged the props back a little bit, so I'm at about 19. Now just starting to level out, and I must say she's very responsive to the trim. Look at the vibration wheel on the controls, it's amazing. The night lighting in this aircraft has been recreated very well indeed, very atmospheric, the hands of the dials being the luminous radial, not principally designed for night flying. They didn't have beacon or strobe lights at that time, but here's a demonstration of the landing lights. We're about halfway through our flight now. Altitude's around 3,000 feet, which is where I want to be. But of course balance is an important thing in terms of weight, so I'm going to change fuel feed from my left tank to the right tank. We've been in the air about 15-20 minutes. Landing lights can come off, although at this altitude I could have left them on. There's no autopilot in this aircraft of course, so it's hand flying all the way. But I have to be honest, I'm really enjoying it. And as I think I mentioned earlier, she's very responsive to the trim, allows for fine controls and makes stabilizing in cruise far easier than it is with many other aircraft. The Boeing 247 Delta was one of the first aircraft of this size to have an all-metal frame and body, made possible by the advancement in engine technology and power. Technology at this time didn't allow for circuit breakers, but it did have fuses. These are the fuses for the radio, and down on the co-pilot side is a fuse box for the rest of the system. And what's really cool is there are spare fuses at the bottom and you can swap them out. All fuses are simulated. We've started our descent now towards Orcas Island Airport, just passing 2,500 feet. And now starting to trim with a little bit of nose up, so I need to reduce airspeed. With such a big wing, this is not quick to come down, although caution when you put your gears down, the drag intensifies considerably. The airport's at the end of this inlet. Quick check on temperatures again. I've left my props where they were, but as I'm descending I've pulled back on my throttles considerably. Oil pressure remains remarkably high. As we're descending I've got my oil shutters 3/4 closed. I don't want to cool the oil too much. The two levers next to the oil shutters are the carb heat. Don't need those, so they're currently off. Runway ahead, speed is about 100 miles an hour and altitude is coming up on about 1,000 feet. Time to put the gear down. As you put the gear down you need to be conscious of your airspeed. It'll fall away rapidly. Gears now down, as you can hear, and speed just touching below 90 miles an hour. I'm a little higher, so increasing my rate of descent. Now turning on final, mixture and props are fully forward, landing lights on. I can see I'm a little high, easing back on the throttle but not all the way back or the engines may cut on me. The approach speed I'm looking for is around about 80 miles an hour, could be a little bit less, but because I got to lose some altitude I may have to come in a little bit faster. Haven't been able to lose speed, so this may be a bit of a long landing. Fortunately, this aircraft does not require a lot of space. This is quite a long runway, so I should be fine. Now aiming to touch down the halfway point. My speed's about 20 miles an hour too fast at 80 miles per hour. Touchdown. Not using my brakes, let the speed wash up and the nose come up. tail wheel is down and now I can apply the brakes. Of course, there's no flaps on the 247 Delta. Well, we're down safe and sound. Landing lights can now come off and we can taxi through to the terminal. Oil shutters now fully open. I don't want the oil to overheat. There are a number of features and elements that I haven't covered during this review, but I'll leave those for you to explore should you decide to get this aircraft. I highly recommend it, and at its price cost me just under £15, that's about 17 euros or about 20 US. It represents real value for money, and I have to say it's been quite a while since I've really been challenged by an aircraft in Microsoft Flight Simulator. You do need to spend some time with this aircraft before you master it, but once you do, it's immensely satisfying. Well, I hope you found this enjoyable. Thank you very much for staying with me. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already for more like this. To WING42 I say well done. It's a great aircraft. There are a few bugs and a few niggles, but I accept this is not the totally finished product. This is one staying in my hangar. Stay well, look after yourselves, and bye for now.